This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Mona Acts Out. The author, Mischa Berlinski. Celebrated stage actress Mona Zahid wakes up on Thanksgiving morning to the clamor of guests packed into her Manhattan apartment and to a wave of dread. Her in-laws are lurking on the other side of the bedroom door. She's still fighting with her husband, and in just a few weeks she will begin rehearsals at Shakespeare's Cleopatra, the hardest role in theater. In an impulsive burst, Mona bounds out the door with the family dog in tow. I forgot the parsley is her lame excuse to find her estranged mentor, Milton Katz, who was recently forced out of the legendary theater company he founded amid accusations of sexual misconduct. Mona's escape turns into an overnight adventure that brings her face to face with her past, with her creative power and its limitations, and ultimately with all the people she has ever loved. Mischa Berlinski is the author of Fieldwork, a finalist for the National Book Award, and Peacekeeping. He's written for the New York Review of Books, Men's Journal, and Harper's Magazine, and his writing has appeared in Best American Essays and Best American Travel Writing. He lives in Istanbul. Happy to have for the first time. Mischa Berlinski joined me
Thank you
here.
so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So the idea for this story, where did it come from?
It kind of grew a little bit slowly. I got really absorbed in watching a TV series about how actors should play Shakespeare. It was a BBC series from the early 1980s. John Barton is one of the founders of the Royal Shakespeare Company, and he put together a series about 1981 or 1982 in which he featured actors from the RSC playing scenes and doing monologues, and then he would kind of coach them through it and how to do it better. And a lot of very famous actors appeared on it. The whole thing is on YouTube. It's wonderful. Ian McKellen, Judi Dench,
Mm.
Patrick Stewart, Ben Kingsley, a lot of these actors before they became very famous. And I really got absorbed with watching it over and over again. It was kind of my introduction to Shakespeare as well as my introduction to what acting. And I thought that I wanted to spend more time with actors after that. I thought originally that I wouldn't that I thought they would write a pilot for a TV series about a bunch of actors putting on a Shakespearean play, and that didn't really go anywhere. But it kind of became the basis for a novel. It was going to be a novel about a bunch of actors putting on a Shakespearean play, and then I started with one. The play was going to be Antony and Cleopatra, and then I kind of woke up with Mona. She's the protagonist of the novel. I woke up with her that morning, and she was very vivid to me and very bright, and I just stayed with her. And the focus became more on Mona and her life and less about what I thought the novel was going to be about, which was about the rehearsal room and the process of putting together a play. It just became about this woman, and I didn't really have a structure for it when I began. I just kind of lived it with her. Turned out that it was just one day in her life, about a month before rehearsals began.
Let's talk about the other one of the other characters here. Her mentor, her estranged mentor, Milton Katz. How did you create Milton?
Well, I guess I was writing it when there was a lot of men like Milton in New York life, American life, who were being Me Too'd. I was reading these stories every day in the Times. I originally had the idea that Milton was going to be the founder of the company and perhaps the director of the play. And then I realized just as everyone, all these other men were being outed in Me Too scandals, that it would perhaps he had been also. I thought that all these stories that I kept reading in the Times, I kept thinking that they seemed so complicated emotionally, much more so than the accounts that I was reading in the New York Times were lending me to believe. You know, there were stories, they were really, I thought that a novel would really be a better way to talk about one of these Me Too stories than the way the Times was, which was both polemical and short. So I came up with Milton just by thinking, it's always such a mistake to say where you come up with a character. I don't know where Milton came from, but I had a strong sense of he kind of burst off the page for me just as soon as I realized that the building in which he worked, that theater, had been a squat sometime in the 1960s, and he was a hippie who loved Shakespeare, and then he had become 40 years later a real member of the cultural establishment, and that was kind of the arc that I wanted to trace in his character. And then I realized that he had been caught up in the changing of the times. So he went from being somebody who was an outcast to somebody who was a member of the establishment to an outcast again. I thought that there was stuff there that was interesting for me to spend a lot of time with. And that's really when you're writing a novel, you just want people you can you're happy to spend a lot of time hanging around with.
Mischa, the relationship between Mona and Milton, not to give away too much, no spoilers here, but what's it like?
This isn't the kind of novel where spoilers will ruin the reading experience. I think it's a conflicted relationship. Milton has a remarkable ability to bring out the best in his actors and actresses. I think that's kind of a famous quality certain directors have, that they can say the thing that makes you act better than anyone else has ever made you act before. And actors who are like writers or other creative people, very dependent on their muses, on the people who bring out the best in their talent. Like some people are dependent on a coach to do the same thing. Some athletes only perform for certain coaches. I think that actors Mona is very dependent on him, and she's very fond of him. But at the same time, he's an overbearing presence, both artistically and personally. And I think Mona has a lot of sympathy. She feels a real liberation when he steps away from her life, when she's on her own after she's been so influenced by him for so long. So it's a strong, intense, loving, conflictual relationship. One which Mona isn't quite sure was for the better or for the worse in her life.
What was the most exciting part of writing this story for you?
Well, every novelist would say it's finishing it. I mean, the most exciting part was definitely, there was two parts that were pretty exciting. And one came at the beginning. There was three places that were very exciting. The first was when I imagined the building, which was where the theater was. That's where I thought I really could get somewhere with this novel. And almost everything that I wrote about that disappeared from the final draft. But having a physical place where these actors would gather and congregate, and thinking about the story of how that building came to be a theater, that was very exciting. It was very exciting when Mona was lying in bed on that first morning, and I could start to hear her in-laws bickering on the other side of the door. And I realized, I started to wonder, who are these people and why are they in Mona's apartment? And then when she stepped outside and her father-in-law wants to talk to her about his theories of who actually wrote the plays of Shakespeare. That was very exciting because Mona had such strong emotional reaction to that I thought that, yes, this is a character I really feel like she can grow and I can spend a lot of time with her. And then when I came to the end, I really didn't know how the novel was going to end until it ended. And it brought out a lot of intense emotions in me. I felt very powerfully as I wrote it, that this was the ending I wanted. And I thought that I was surprised how much emotion I felt as I wrote the last few pages. So I think that the places where your characters kind of surprise you, those are always the most exciting places to write. The places where you sit down and your character suddenly starts saying things that you didn't expect them to say. It doesn't always happen. A lot of novel writing happens kind of slowly. But in every novel I've written, and that's three, there's been a moment where a character has suddenly said something, and I've said, "Oh, this person's alive, and I can move. I can go. I can deal with this. There's somewhere to go here."
So are you a
But
plotter or a pantser?
I would. The first two novels I wrote, I definitely had a strong plot. I had a strong sense of the narrative arc. I knew where it would end, and I knew where it would begin, and I knew the high points that it would follow. And they were plotted novels. And I was constantly feeling constrained by the existence of a plot, the way a plot makes you write to the beats of a novel that you've already preordained. This novel was completely plotless. From the moment I let it go just the way it wanted to go. I didn't know from moment to moment where it would go, and that leaves you a big, wide open canvas. But if you don't have a sense of where things are going, it can be very nerve-wracking because if the words aren't flowing, you don't know where to take it next. You can't just give yourself an assignment to say, well, the next thing that happens is this. A plot really, it's a nice crutch to lean on as you're writing your way through a novel. But this novel was definitely written without a plot or without any sense of the structure that would unfold. Every step of it I allowed just to grow organically.
And then the character, like you just said earlier, says something, the surprise or a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, they're not surprising you the whole way through the novel. I don't
Right.
think that would be to the actual experience of writing it. At some points, the characters start to you act a little bit like a cliche of themselves, and then when you revise it and you revise it, you try and get back a little bit of the spontaneity. But especially in the beginning, it's a lot of fun. It's very exciting in the beginning when the characters start to walk and talk and breathe and do things you don't expect.
Mm.
Because then you think, yeah, well, maybe there is something I could sustain here for 200 or 300 pages.
Mm.
That's a big, I mean, it definitely happened in the very beginning with Mona that she had a few things that she said or did right in the beginning that I said, oh, there's a lot of discoveries here to be made. You know, actors are always talking about they've played Hamlet 50 times, but there's always another discovery to be made. With Mona and her entourage, I kept making discoveries. I mean, oh, Mona has jealousy. Oh, Mona has this kind of business, emotional business she has to deal with. Mona she has anger problems or an addiction problem, or oh, she's not confident about the role she's supposed to play. You know, these are discoveries, and then you move forward with them and see where they go in building this character. And at the same time, you try and put it together in a story that will have something that will be interesting enough to read. I mean, it can't. It's not just interior life. It has to have some event has to happen. Trying to combine it all is tough.
Yeah. Now, until you watch the John Barton series on Shakespeare on YouTube, which, by the way, I'm definitely going to spend some
I
time
cannot
watching.
recommend it highly enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pushing it on everybody, and I think it's just one of the most beautiful series. If you have any interest in Shakespeare at all, or particularly if you don't,
Did you
particularly
have a lot of interest in Shakespeare before watching that series?
not a strong one. I took a
Mm.
Shakespeare class. I read Shakespeare in high school. I took a couple of courses in Shakespeare at college, including one with from the famous Shakespearean James Shapiro. But I wouldn't say I had a particular passion for Shakespeare or any depth of understanding of who Shakespeare was as an artist or a writer or what Shakespeare. I came to Shakespeare as a reader, which isn't the right way to come to Shakespeare.
Mm.
Shakespeare has to be come to as a he really has to be come to as an audience. You have to view him as an audience, especially audio coming through your ears. The words come in through your ears, which means they have to have an intermediary. You know, a lot of the way we do Shakespeare in America now is you're assigned a Shakespearean class, and it's like reading a Bach, or it's like reading a Beethoven symphony rather than hearing it. They have to be put into the context of a play. They have to be made into a play. Actors have to interpret the roles and do the difficult work of trying to make the characters come to life. And when the actors have done their job, the effect can be really overwhelming as a member of the audience. Again, that word, the audience, the listeners.
Mm.
Uh, but until I saw the John Barton series, I don't think I had realized that if you want to know anything about Shakespeare, you have to go through the actors. The actors are the ones they've got. Shakespeare was an actor. The actors have a nearly unbroken tradition of playing Shakespeare's works, going all the way back to Shakespeare himself. It's this 450 to 500-year-old artistic tradition of people doing the same plays over and over again. And the actors are the ones with the keys to that lock. So John Barton, he knew that more than anybody else. I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen the Playing Shakespeare series, to watch it. And if Shakespeare was all a mystery to your listeners, I'm assuming it's not to you, but if it's a mystery to your
Mm.
listeners, what the real passion people have for it is, that's right. That's it. Certainly for me, changed my life.
How'd you become a writer?
I come from a literary family. My father is a writer. My sister is a writer. Um, I always assumed that there would be some kind of literary work in my life. I was living in Thailand with my girlfriend at the time, around 1999, 2000, and there was a nonfiction story that I really became quite obsessed with. I became obsessed with the conversion of some of the tribal peoples of northern Thailand to Christianity. And I really wanted to know why they converted, and I couldn't figure out a way to do. I tried to pitch that story to various magazines and various book editors, saying that this would make a fascinating not a fascinating travel kind of book, and I couldn't sell it. A couple of years later, I realized that I could turn it into the basis for a novel, which I did. That became my first novel, Fieldwork. And so I think I became a writer because I had a very specific story I wanted to tell. It wasn't an abstract idea that I wanted to be a writer or that I had something inside of me about my own life that I had to put on paper. I had a very specific set of questions, and I thought that by writing about them, I could answer them. And the right vehicle for me in all three of the novels that I wrote was the novel. The right vehicle that allowed me to explore the things that I was interested in was through fiction.
What's the best thing about being an author?
There are certain moments of real emotional satisfaction where you can really put something on the page, take it out of your life, and leave it behind. Those moments are extremely rare. They don't come very frequently. But there is the possibility of giving a definite shape and form to an emotion that you've felt or an experience that you've had. And that is very liberating. It's an unburdening. But generally speaking, it's a miserable kind of way to make a living. It doesn't have much money behind it. The best that you can hope out of writing is probably obscurity. Most of the time, you're going to fail to say what you've wanted to say. It involves a whole lot of lonesome struggling because you're just not going to, you're working alone at your desk, and most days you're going to fail at saying what you've wanted to say. Every so often, there's a compensatory pleasure when you succeed in putting onto the page something that you feel meets an aesthetic standard, or it liberates an inner emotion that has been before blocked.
And what would you like readers to take away from Mona Acts Out?
Oh, I just hope they laugh. This is a comic novel. I hope that I really don't want them to take away any serious lessons or impart any deep meanings. I hope that it's just that they find it fun. I mean, if there's anything serious in it, it's deep under the surface. But I really would hope to keep my readers amused, have them laugh at the funny parts, and perhaps have the sense when they're done that these characters who became so vivid to me with the time that I spent them have some real presence in their lives as well.
Do you hear from readers much? Do you read what they write about your books, including this one?
It's pretty addictive nowadays when you can look and see Amazon reviews and Goodreads reviews. I would prefer to hear less from them, frankly, but they do have a presence in my mental life. You can't escape it. At a certain point, I don't think it's healthy either emotionally or artistically, but there they are. And so the answer to your question is yes.
Mm. And what is next for you in your writing?
I write for money. I mean, I have to write for money, and it would be dependent on having a contract for another novel. I don't. The amount of I think you can write a few novels inspired simply by the necessity of seeing what happens when you try and write. But I think that at a certain point, also, every novelist wants to consider themselves a professional. So I guess the right answer would be it depends on the market.
Hmm.
I mean, it really depends on the market. If the novel has a successful future and an editor wants to commission another novel at this point, there's no end, there's no shortage of stories that can be told. I mean, there really isn't. but you need to have some sense that there's a connection on the other end. You need to have some sense that you're writing for a public who's receptive. And I'm not sure right now. I hope that public is out there.
He is Mischa Berlinski. The book out now is Mona Acts Out. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast.